Hey, what's up, interwebs? I'm here tonight with Stephen Archer.
Oh, yeah, how you doing?
Oh, there we go.
Yep. No, all's good.
All right. Hey, I see you over there. What's up, Chris EBM? So, introduce yourself. What do you do? Where are you from?
My name is Stephen, and I do rather a lot.
That is true.
Within the scene, I'm probably most known for being half of Ego Likeness, which is my dark electronic rock band. I have another project called Stoneburner, which is has been a little more active over the past number of years, which is very noisy and industrial. Then I also do a great deal of artwork, and I have a brand new book out that actually kind of relates to Stoneburner called Red in Tooth and Claw. And I don't know, I've been a DJ since people wore animal skins, so.
Yeah, that was a while. So, for both Ego Likeness and Stoneburner, where did those band names come from?
Both of them came from the book Dune, okay. Which oddly enough is not really one of my favorite books. It's I like a lot of the ideas in it. I like a lot of the philosophy in it, but by and large, I don't really enjoy space opera. Mm-hmm. However, previous to Ego, Donna and I had a band called Seraphim Gate, and that fell apart, and we were putting something new together, and I just happened to be reading Dune at the time, and Donna picked it up and was going through the glossary, and she was like, Ego Likeness. And I was like, you sure? And she goes, yes, you got to pick the last band name I'm using. And I was like, okay. And then with Stoneburner, I ran across it, the definition of it, and I knew, I was like, I hoard band names. Mm. Like I will often make bands when I run across a good name. Like I've got a band called Ocellus that specifically exists because of when I ran across the word, and I was like, that's cool. Mm-hmm. So with Stoneburner, I knew what the logo was, and I knew what the idea behind it was for like 3 years before I actually had any music for it, and it took me that long to figure out what I wanted to do with it. So yeah, and that started out very much as this kind of weird. It started out as a thought experiment of what would dance music on Arrakis sound like. And so I did about 6 records worth of that, and then did a bunch of tours, and that went great. And then I realized that I could do another record, but it would bore the shit out of me. So I decided to kind of finally do the industrial record that I've been promising myself, and have since then transitioned into doing what I'm doing now.
And how'd you first, what was the first, dark electro industrial artist you ever stumbled upon?
You know, I had, well, I'm old, so the progression for me was kind of, when I was, 10-ish or something, I was very, very into Alan Parsons Project, Pink Floyd, Tangerine Dream. Mm. Then in about 83, what was it? The Art of Noise came out with Who's Afraid, and that just totally blew me away. I loved their use of, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what it was, but sampling at the time. And then I got into punk, and then into industrial music. And arguably, like I was probably 15 or 16, and I got into like Fetus and Big Black, and then Ministry, Skinny Puppy, all that stuff. Skinny Puppy was like the thing that for me everything cohesed, because it was like, okay, well, this is the anger of punk rock and stuff like that, but with all the electronics and the atmosphere that I've always been drawn to. So I mean, Puppy has always been a huge influence on what I do, but there's an awful lot of other stuff in there as well.
So you just put out a new Stoneburner album, Red and Tooth and Claw, right?
Mm-hmm. It's not technically new. It's
okay.
It came out about 5 years ago.
Oh,
and,
okay.
But I re-released it through my label Cop, because previous to that I had self-released it, but I re-released it to coincide with the book, which is based on the story that came out of doing that EP or that record. And I went out and I recorded a new track for it and cleaned it up and had it remastered.
So how long did that the book take you to make? Because it's a huge project.
So the whole project took about from the beginning with the EP. It's been about 5 years. But the book itself, I do artwork full time, art music full time. So when I'm not on tour, I'm home painting, and so it took me 2 months, where it was my full time job, 8 hours a day doing the artwork for the book, and then about a year and a half of editing and adding other stuff, because it's more than this. There's 2 additional This is 200 pages. And there's about another 100 pages that are available as DLC. So that alone is 400 images, and that's not including, rather than, let's say, 100 or so images I didn't use, plus the 100 or so that are in the other chapters. So yeah, and then editing was a whole big mess, and that just for this sort of format, it was a very involved process.
Over in the comments, Arcturus says, "Tasty artwork."
Thanks. Yeah, I don't advise eating it. The cadmium yellow in particular is poisonous, but you do you. I mean, Donna, my wife, has many times said, "Hey, if I'm going to go out, I think I'm going to go out by like breaking into an art gallery and eating a famous painting." So, by all means, I think that if you're definitely going to do it, go for it. You may find it easier to blend it first, though. Just make it into like some sort of a shake format type.
So, what gave you like the idea in the first place to make the book?
So, this happened. The EP started. Okay, set the Wayback Machine. I had just gotten off my first tour for Technology Implies Belligerence, which is the first record I did that was with me singing and talking about the things I think are important to talk about in that format. And I was thinking a lot about stage presence and persona and how you present yourself to the audience. And I kept coming back to this image of this kind of ultimate apex predator stalking the stage, and I had this image in my head of of one of the werewolves from Cycle of the Werewolf. So I kept playing around with that a little bit, and in order to kind of focus that, I wrote this song that ended up on an Electronic Saviors compilation called Lupus Invicat Lupus, which is kind of bullshit Latin for wolf calls to wolf.
Right.
And that was cool, but I still wanted to play around with it. And then I did this digital painting of this gigantic wolf kind of looming over this city, and just titled it The World Wolf, and that was kind of sat there. And as I was developing the record, I was in between labels, so when you're in that situation, we live in a digital world, so it's now easier to put out music than ever, really. So I was able to I have this thing where it's difficult for me to do something unless I have a reason for it. So I learned
Mhm.
years ago, like I would book art shows 6 months in advance with no work for them, and so I got online. And I was like, okay, new record's coming out. It's called Red in Tooth and Claw because that was a cool phrase, and I was thinking about the Keats poem,
Mhm.
and it'll be out in a month and a half. Pre-orders start now, with none of it written.
Mhm.
Um, and so I got thinking about the wolf and kind of pinning down why he existed and what his whole point was, why he was attacking these cities, and eventually kind of came down to this idea of his mate had died after drinking from a polluted river, and he was kind of taking revenge, and that was the beginning part of the story where it came from. And that the first song on the record basically tells that part of the story.
Mhm.
So, and then it was just kind of exploring. So it's very common for musicians and artists to write from another point of view to come
Mhm.
up with characters, and I've done that before. Donna's done that before.
Mhm.
Bowie's famous for doing it,
Right.
and so writing from the point of view of this uh, celestial wolf god uh, was actually a very cool experience because it's you can't get much more objective than that.
Right.
And so that allowed me to really kind of step away from my own personal feelings about the world and humans and all of that, and allow him to kind of look at it from that objective of viewpoint.
Mhm.
So that was a very useful thing. So I did that record, and then COVID hit, and so I wasn't able to tour for it or anything. And so I just
Right.
kind of moved on and did another one called Beauty is Terror, which focused on the idea of loss of self.
Mhm.
And each of the songs is about some form of loss of self, like drugs, sex, whatever,
Right.
spiritual things. And got signed to Cop and put out a full length called Apex Predator, which kind of brings the wolf back in a uh, non-linear sort of way.
Mhm.
And then just a couple years ago, I was just sitting. Actually, almost just about exactly 2 years ago, I was just sitting around playing with art programs and thinking about the story and how I could. I was thinking about maybe trying to do some videos for some of the songs that I didn't do videos for the first time around, and
Mhm.
also for like backing video. And the whole thing just kind of presented itself, and I just started writing. And I knew how all of the major beats for the story, so it was just an issue of kind of watching the movie, doing the artwork, and writing it all down.
Mhm. So, why a wolf? Like, why specifically do you like focus
Why
around wolves a
specifically
lot?
wolves? So um, the factual reason
Mhm.
um, in the real world is that that's what it came out of that image, and that was pretty much just. I have a tendency to believe that, and I don't literally mean that I believe this, but it's the best way of explaining it, that all the artwork exists out in this kind of platonic ideal, out in the
Mhm.
universe already perfect. It knows what it needs to be, and your job is to bring it through without fucking it up. So it kind of says, "Hi, here I am," and then you know, as an artist, we channel it, and you can talk to it, and you can make suggestions and be like, hey, how about if we try this or that, and it'll go, yeah, okay, let's see what happens. And sometimes something good comes out of it,
Mhm.
about those things. But more often than not, the more that you inflict yourself on the artwork, the the worse it gets, because essentially it's just vanity. It's not about the artwork anymore. It's about you. So that image is what presented itself, and like I said, I was focusing on this idea of these kind of this ultimate apex predator.
Right.
That said, in the universe of the story, um, the wolf is not unique. He is one of X number of what I call in the book the curators of the Library of Was. Their job is to collect. They exist concurrent with the universe throughout its, from the Big Bang to heat death, back to the Big Crunch, through cycle after cycle after cycle. And their job is to collect all of the ideas and the stories that happen in whatever their region of the universe is, bring them back to that singularity, and when it explodes back out, that is creates the starting conditions for the next universe. And so that way, the universe continually grows. And the wolf basically, within his region, humans are the most viable option to cultivate for these stories and these ideas and things like that. So he focuses on them. I'm working on kind of a side goal to it that talks a little bit about how off in the distance there are others that come from regions that have all these different kinds of life forms, and as they're kind of walking back slowly to the singularity through the black nothingness, they're like can't keep a constant shape because there's so many different conflicting ideas from different species happening inside them all the time that's kind of forming them. Whereas for the wolf, it basically just breaks down to this idea that all humans across all cultures know what wolves are, and even if they don't know from of the animal itself, the archetype is very much a real thing. And so the explanation that I give in the book is because they're wolves because they can't not be wolves. It's just that is how it is kind of the average of this idea of both a predator and as a guide. So it's kind of all of the things that the entity needs to be, and he just happens to form that particular shape. It's not, so it's as good a justification of it for it as any, and I like the underlying symbolism of that, and it plays, this other story that I'm working on, it kind of talks a little bit about how just the semiotics, what they represent. So.
Luke over in the comments says it's published by Raw Dog Screaming Press, and that's almost too perfect.
Yeah. Raw Dog's been great. We've been with Donna. Donna was the first of us to get the book deal through them. And what was funny is actually we knew them before they were a publishing company because they had a band that had opened for us a couple of times, like way back in the day, and then didn't see them, and they went and started this publishing company, and have done very, very well for themselves. They've probably published hundreds of books at this point, but they published Donna's first novel, Isabel Burning, and then her second, Red Horses, and have done all of her poetry books and my children's book and everything. Yeah, they're great to work with. But yes, it did work out very, very well for this particular project. That's what the name of the publishing company.
I have one question about the album. I know it's been out. You just like redid it to put it out, but I noticed that I felt like the final track on the album was a lot softer than the whole rest of the album, and I was just curious, like, why you did it that way.
Well, so that's the new song that I wrote.
Okay, so that's the
one. And so in the story, Red's mate, she's never actually named in the book, but I refer to her as Cyan, because when she dies, she exists in this kind of cyan wolf shaped ghost form, and she acts as kind of a guide for him. So the wolf, the world wolf is when I try and explain how he thinks, he's very, very, very smart and has absolutely no emotional intelligence whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what his role is, and that's the extent of it. So when he meets this wolf and they fall in love, and then she dies, he has no idea how to process it because he's never dealt with that before. She was the first thing that ever really like interacted with him in a way other than as humans looking at a god. Like she was interacting with him on this very personal level, like as an individual. And which is what begins everything. He loses his mind. He was like, he does not know how to deal with it. So throughout the course of the book, she acts kind of as she acts as his emotional guidance. After she dies immediately, and he kind of starts to lose it, she comes to him in a dream and basically says, chaos often drives change and growth. So maybe you need to go and get this out and inflict that on the humans, which is basically just giving him permission to just destroy everything. So then later on, he can't get killed, but he does. They do manage to kind of knock him out, and he has this other dream sequence where she basically steps up and goes, I think it's time for a little change of perspective, a Dickensian change of perspective, as she calls it, and kind of shows him what his life would be like had he been a human, to try and kind of get him to understand that. And she's like, you all of this that you're doing, that's great, but your job is to cultivate humans and to develop them. So you're kind of acting counter to counter to what you're supposed to be doing. So you need to figure out a way to get out of this because that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And so she basically is like, you're going to have to let them kill you. You're going to have to let them win at this in order for them to move on. And he goes, well, fine, but I'm not going to make it easy for them. And eventually, after a couple more months of destroying things, he ends up dying on the edge of this cliff, and she comes back to visit him. That song is her talking to him and basically saying, "Look, all of these things that you've done, it's not bringing me back." And then he dies, and a few seconds pass, or however long passes, and she goes, "Are you done? Are you done with this? Because I'm kind of disappointed in you. Like you survived the beginning and end of universes, and you thought you could die. Like that doesn't work. So no, that's just your body, and now we're going to go." And so that's why that song transitions into the second part of kind of reestablishing his role within everything. So that song's like I felt that since I didn't really have her fleshed out in any real way when I did the EP the first time, and have since put out the book, that it was a chance to give her a voice and give her a chance to say what needed to be said. There is another song on the record called "Unsympathetic Magic" that talks about that whole death scene as well, but not quite from the same perspective, more from his perspective.
Okay. I'm not used to talking to someone that has such a fully fleshed out story. It's kind of cool.
Everything I do tends to be fairly well developed. I've spent my entire life learning to make stuff, and I tend to not be too frivolous about it. And every once in a while, they'll be like, "Well, that's just kind of what happened," and there it is. But more often than not, there's a reason for most of the things I do.
All right. And of course, as always, if anyone out in the comments has questions, throw them in here. So unless I missed it, Ego Likeness hasn't put anything new out in quite a while. Are you working on anything?
A couple of years ago, we put out a cover of "A Live to Tell" by Madonna.
Now, why that song? Of all things, why that song?
I think it's just been it's a good song. But also it's a very personal song, and I think it's we've all felt I think a lot of what that song is about is a sense of betrayal and
Mm.
things like that from people we care about. And I think that song is, speaks to that. That said, no, we haven't. Because we don't want to write the last album again, which is, something we from the very beginning, all, from song to song, we have said we're not, we try not to repeat ourselves too much. And for whatever good or harm that has done, it certainly has made it very difficult to market what we do, but it's also honest. So but that said, we have kind of conceptually nailed down what we are trying to do musically. So I have to get a new Stoneburner record out the door over the next month or two. And after that's done, I think I'm going out on tour with Pig in November. I want to have the record done before that.
Mm-hmm.
Once that's done, and once we get back from the Pig tour, then we'll be starting new Ego material.
Nice. You said you're going out on tour. Also, do you have any other shows coming up?
Sunday, I'm playing up at QXT's is celebrating their 33rd anniversary. So cool. I'm headlining a show up in QXT's in Jersey. And then Ego's playing a few shows over the next, I think in October. We're doing one down in Virginia with Be Born Be Tong, and then we're playing at a castle, I think, in Ohio. I don't know. I didn't set the show up, so I'm not sure. But yeah, apparently it's like a Halloween event thing. And then Stoneburner will be doing the last dozen shows on the upcoming Pig tour.
Question over in the comments. My buddy Kyler says, "What's your setup like to get things to sound just right?" So I guess that's like a technical.
In what context? Do you mean live? Do you mean in the studio?
I have no idea. Kyler, if you can clarify for us, that'd be great.
Like with Ego, I tend to keep things very, very simple. I've been using the same guitar processor for 20 something years. I've been using a Pod 2.0 processor for that because I can dial, and I'm using a different one, a different Pod Live, but I'm just doing that but it's pretending to be this one. Beyond that, from a studio standpoint, I highly recommend a VST processor called TrackSpacer, which is basically acts as a side chain. So, like, let's say you have a kick and a bass going at the same time. If you have them both going at once, it can get very dense and muddy. But if you put TrackSpacer on the bass and then side chain the kick into it, it ducks out all the frequencies the kick uses whenever it hits. So it makes space for that kick to go through. And it cleans up, but you can use it in other things, like let's say you're a rock band, you've got a lot of guitar, right? Well, both guitar and crash cymbals eat vocals. Mm-hmm. So you put TrackSpacer on those, and so every time you're singing, in real time, it pulls out the frequencies the vocal use out of your guitars or out of those crash cymbals, and helps them cut through. I actually use that. I use that live even so that my vocals cut through the tracks.
All right. And both Kyler and Joseph were asking more questions about how you do things live because you always sound good.
Oh, thanks. So live, well, both bands use essentially the same rig. Live, which is just running the tracks off of a Mac Pro. Stoneburner is running everything out of Ableton. So the big trick with live is I know what we sound like, but the sound guy doesn't, unless we bring somebody with us, which we don't do. So the trick is to give them enough so that they can mix for the room, but not so much that they can fuck it up. So with Stoneburner, I send 6 channels to the house. a kick mono, bass mono, and then a stereo pair that is everything else, including the live drums. And then the fifth channel is my vocals with my vocal effects baked into them, and then which is, unless there is an issue, those are the ones that I want them to use. There's a sixth channel that is just EQ'd vocals, completely dry other than the EQ, so that if there is a feedback issue, they can bring that up and bring the other ones down. I use using in-ears goes a long way. If you're like with Stoneberg, the vocals are very, very processed, and so I use in-ears so that way I don't have to have the vocals in the monitors at all. And honestly, using in-ears is the way to go. Like it made me a better singer, being able to clearly hear myself every time. I do kind of a weird trick. I used to do this with hardware, and now I don't. I'm just doing it all inside inside Ableton. But since I already have all the pre-recorded vocals, what I do is I run my vocal. Okay, so I used to use a hardware vocoder for this, and hardware vocoder works by having two signals. You have the carrier and the modulator, and the carrier is usually a synth, and then the modulator is your vocals, and that's how you get the robot kind of thing, because the modulator is wah-wah-wahing the synth. But if you run, and I kind of stumbled on this by accident, if you run the pre-recorded vocals through that, then I'm modulating my own vocals but all the effects and the distortion, all that stuff is already in those vocals, or the tracked vocals. So I'm modulating those, so you're getting this mix of my live vocals plus the tracked vocals being modulated. And so it lets you throw just a ridiculous amount of effects on your voice with less of a chance of feeding back, and then just using the in-ears goes beyond that. Otherwise, everything goes through. There's a little bit of compression that I've added after the fact, and then I've got a BBE Sonic Maximizer DI rack that everything goes through, which I usually don't worry about. But if you need to tune a PA, you can adjust the sub. It can bring out the subs a little bit, but mostly it just comes down to getting a good mix in the first place in the studio. Trying to, and this is difficult for me because I like lots of sound, but it's going through and getting rid of anything that doesn't need to be there. Goes a long way to getting a good solid mix.
All right. Joseph over in the comments from Zentrifuge says, "Oh, cool! I always request my percussion to be through mono, so I think I'm on the right track."
Yeah, I mean, it can be like Ego Likeness runs completely in mono live, except for Rick's guitar because he's a princess. But yeah, like with mono, you always know what you're going to get. With stereo, you always run the risk of phase canceling, and that can really screw shit up. So unless you if you can run your set in mono, then yeah, man, go for it, because you will get a nice, a much easier to control setup. Yeah.
All right. One question I always ask, however, I think we already know the answer, is if you were an animal, what kind? But I think we know that, yes?
I mean, yeah, or an octopus.
Ooh, an octopus. That's a good one.
They're pretty amazing. So yeah, I mean, like we have used wolves an awful lot throughout the course of our career with Ego Likeness. Donna started it with a song called Wolves, based around one of the stories in one of the parts of Isabel Burning, and yeah, it's just kind of it's been an unintentional reoccurring theme that just kind of worked out that way. I suppose that if that digital painting had been a cockatoo, it might have been a whole other story.
Christine says Rick is a yacht princess.
Rick is very much a yacht princess. That is true. Captain Smooth. You know, Rick is the longest surviving member of Ego Likeness, and you know, is always always enthusiastic and always fantastic. And you know, we make fun of him because I mean, you know, he's essentially Quagmire, but you know, he's still always reliable, and you know, he's not a pain in the ass, which is really my number one requirement for anybody that I'm in a band with. Is just like don't be a pain in the ass. Like otherwise, we're good. Like like do your job. Don't be a pain in the ass.
Makes
Take
sense.
whatever your medication needs to be.
Yeah. All right. Anyone in the comments got anything else? Now, where can people follow you and stay up to date, like on all your socials and stuff? Where are you?
Oh, I'm all over Facebook. I'm not. Well, I have a TikTok account that I must never post anything to. There's an Instagram that's Ego Likeness Art and Music. EgoLikenessBand.com. For the book, it's I've got Red and Tooth and Claw.art, which is apparently a thing now that we do. Which has, you can read the first couple chapters of the book. There's videos. I'm actually in the process of working on, I guess the kids call them a motion comic. So I'm doing a motion comic of the first few chapters. I've got this, actually a guy who's also published by Raw Dog read it for me, Blake Burkhead. Read the book, and he's got just this he's the voice of the wolf, and it's wonderful. Like I tried to do it, and even with like fucking around and pitch shifting it, it just did not sound right. But his voice, like he's essentially like the size of Hagrid, you know. So he's like a big fucking dude, and he's got this big voice that goes along with it. But he does a very good job of modulating it to be appropriately disconnected and then not as needed. So I'm excited about getting that done, if for no other reason than for people to hear what he's doing with it.
All right, and no one else in the comments has said anything, so I'll ask my final question. What do you have to say to anyone who watches this?
Who watches this?
Or, you know, just people who follow you in general, what do you want to say?
I think that the big thing that I try really hard to get through people's heads is that everybody who does this, you know, unless they're buying their own hype, we're all a bunch of just tremendous nerds, and you kind of have to be, particularly if you're doing industrial, because the level, the volume of knowledge that you have to have just to make the gear work. I mean, it's not as much as it used to be, but I mean, like all this shit behind me, a lot of it's from like I've got stuff back from going all the way back to like the early 80s. And, you know, you had to really know. I mean, I've got a manual for my sampler that's that thick. But at the end of the day, I mean, it all just comes down to like sitting down and trying to make the thing that you want to make. None of us are special or different or whatever. It's literally just making the decision to start doing it and then allowing yourself to be okay with sucking at it for a really long time. You know, when Donna and I got together, she went to school for piano and opera. I had been in band since I was 20, and you know, I came from the give me 3 chords and I'll write you a song sort of school, and she came from a very different place. But everything, you know, we do is completely self-taught. Otherwise, like all the production stuff is self-taught. And so when we did the demos for what turned into Ego Likeness, songs from Dead City, we recorded that, you know, the vocals were recorded in our kitchen on a Radio Shack microphone. Hell, even on Dragonfly, the vocals were done that way. And to a 4-track, and I just made this decision that if anybody at any point felt the need to say, hey, you know, this isn't very good or whatever, just be like, well, you're right, the next one will be better. and not letting that idea that's going to kill you. You're learning to do a new thing. You're not going to be good at it, and that's okay. Like it just be happy that you're doing it. And the cool thing about music and art and all that stuff is that it doesn't really matter if it's good or not if it speaks to you.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, Dragonfly, our first full-length record, I mean, the production on it's garbage, but you know, the songs are really good, and the songs matter, and the songs have good lyrics and concepts, and that record means a lot to people, you know, and so it doesn't matter that the production, they don't care about that because the songs matter. Or like when I do, I've done a lot of music videos, and for many years, the best camera I had was my iPhone or my iPad or whatever, and so I shot them on that. And my thinking on it has always been, if the ideas are interesting, nobody's going to give a shit about how, you know, the quality of the optics. And then eventually I got a better camera, but you know, those videos still hold up. I mean, so movie 28 Days Later has a very, very specific look to it. It has that look because it was shot with these Canon XL1 cameras, which were the first digital video cameras that were ostensibly made to replace film. And they look amazing. And by amazing, I mean they look like crap.
Yeah.
But they look like crap in this really beautiful, stylized way. And so, and when they came out, they were like $5,000 a pop. Earlier this year, though, I was thinking about that, and I was like, man, that looks so good. I was like, I bet I can get one now for cheap. And I got one for like $200. And shot a bunch of footage with it while we were on tour this summer. And I'm going to do a video with it. I haven't done it yet, but I know that the first question I'm going to get is like, it will be two. It'll be like, one, why does it look like crap? Or two, what did you do to make it look like crap? Like, because we live in this like pristine digital age now, where like, you know, you see digital versions of what it looks like when you left a photo from the 70s out in the sun and how it fades.
Right.
And we're moving away from this time where these imperfections really bring an aesthetic, bring a sense of intent to the objects. And I think it's the flaws that make things interesting. You know, I will often deliberately go back and introduce random elements into the music and the art or whatever, specifically to recreate that. Because like, if you do that, like you will come up with stuff that would never have occurred to you, but here it is, and then you can play with that and work with that. And whereas like, I don't know, I think when things are perfect, it gets lost. And so,
yeah,
you can appreciate the flaws of that are innate to older technology. But yeah, and so like anyway, the entire point of that being that it doesn't matter what you have. If you have ideas as an artist, then just start writing stuff. I think there's a bunch of Gorilla stuff that was written on like a toy piano or on one of the first iPads. You know, like the tool doesn't matter. It's how you use it. I've known far too many artists and musicians, in particular musicians, that I knew this guy who would buy a piece of gear, try out a couple of patches, and then sell it because it wasn't exactly what he wanted. Or they'd say, oh, when I get this or that other thing I'm going to finally work on my record or whatever. It's like, no, you're fucking not. You're waiting to buy a piece of gear so that you're not scared.
Yeah.
You're waiting for it to make it feel safe to you, and and that's never going to happen. That's all inside your head. You just have to decide that you're going to stick your dick out there, and people are going to laugh at it. You can't control that, but own it at least and let it happen. So. And I think that's just one of those experiences that everybody has to deal with at some point. Otherwise, you're either going to not be emotionally mature enough to be able to deal with it, or you're going to realize what eventually everybody else realizes, that hey, it doesn't kill you. It doesn't. If somebody doesn't like something that you make, it's okay. The world, that's fine. So the good news is that we have access to the entire world essentially online. So if you just keep putting it out there, eventually you're going to find somebody that likes it.
Absolutely.
It may not be a huge number of people, but you never know.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Real quick, on Saturday at 7 p.m., we have Cliff and Ivy on to talk about their brand new record that isn't out yet, but I got to hear it. It's amazing.
They're really good people.
They are awesome. All right. If you want to hang out after the credits roll, you're welcome to, but you certainly don't have to. But yeah, thanks for coming on. This was a blast. Oh, what did you say? Yeah, Joseph says he chose a $200 piece of gear over $400 because it worked better for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's you gotta find the thing that works best for you. Sometimes it is the expensive thing. I play a vintage '89 guitar because it feels right in my hand, and the $200 Strat does not. But if I had if it was a less expensive guitar that still felt right, I would still use it. But I mean, none of the gear that I have is like particularly high end. I've got a few things that were high end. I've got a reverb unit in here that cost $3,000 when it came out that I got for like $50. So like, and that's the other cool thing too, is that just because like when I got a better video camera for shooting videos, I was able to afford one that was a year older than the most recent one.
Right.
Like and the difference was negligible. So like, yeah, you can just get what you can afford and work with that. I mean, another example, I've got a side project that I do called Queen Neon, and I've written 2 records almost entirely on my iPad for it while we were on tour, and then I take it, put back here, drop it into Reason, and then fill it out. But I mean, it's still, yeah, it's never about the tools. Like I can sit down with a sidewalk, a stick, and some dirt and do a pretty cool drawing just because I happen to know how to do it and have the ideas. So,
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. And as Christine just said, good evening, everyone.
Hey.